Yeah, yeah. People sponsored. They would sponsor and say, okay. We're glad you're here, and those of you that are part of our class through our live stream, we are certainly thankful that you're part of our class. We're going to be getting back into Matthew chapter 25 in a few moments, but let me go over some congregational announcements, and then I'll update you on our prayer list, because that too has changed. Ladies, the next coffee conversation and connection will be this Saturday, April the 18th at 9:30. They have changed the location to Taste and See in Albertville. You'll have to Google that if you don't know where that is. But all ladies and teen girls are invited. Afterwards, they will go on a hike, weather permitting. I mean, what's wrong with a car? I mean, you got a perfectly good car. But no, anyway, that's activity is coming up this Saturday. Senior Sunday is the 26th, not this Sunday, but Sunday week. If you want to contribute to the senior gift, you have your money in by Thursday on the 23rd. There are donation envelopes on the bulletin board, or you can do that online. And we have 5 high school graduates for this year. Chattanooga Area Outreach Ministry is holding their annual fish fry fundraiser, which will be coming up on Friday, the 24th of April, 6 o'clock. This is at the Red Bank Church building. Kenneth said, I'm not expecting a big load of people to go up to Chattanooga and participate, but if you would like to contribute, again, there are details on the flyer. There's a flyer on the youth bulletin board, and you can get one of those. And if you want to donate directly to the to Chattanooga Area Outreach Ministry, you can do that. Our 5th Wednesday night singing will be 2 weeks from tonight on April the 29th. Any men that want to lead are asked to let Buddy Petrie know. And if you have a song request, you can scan the code that's in the bulletin, or again, you can write it down and let Buddy know. But that'll be 2 weeks from tonight. This coming Sunday, Brother Jonathan Fears from Jonesboro, Arkansas, will be our guest speaker. Jonathan has authored the book Running from the Devil, which chronicles a lifelong struggle with addiction and how he's been able to overcome that. He has written a follow-up to that, and we'll, I'm sure, be able to hear about that this Sunday. He'll be our guest speaker. Then all adult classes will stay in the auditorium for a closing session with Jonathan. So that's coming up this Sunday. Now, as far as updates to our prayer list, Charles Johnson, of course, fell, and then, of course, it resulted in hip replacement surgery. He is scheduled for rehab at Marshall Manor. They've just not given a specific time yet. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow or Friday, but we'll try to stay up to date on that. But that's the plan. He'll be coming home to Marshall Manor for his physical therapy. Nell Kennedy will have eye surgery tomorrow and has asked that we remember her. Mark Gullion is set for a procedure tomorrow for a kidney stone, so we'll pray that that is successful and without incident. Will and Jana had asked us to remember their son Hunter. He will be going to Honduras on Monday as a preliminary trip for a summer mission trip that they'll be Woodson Chapel will be leading. So remember Hunter in his travels there to Central America. We received word that Chris Ledbetter's mother, Sister Mary Ledbetter, is under hospice care, and they are just requesting prayers for her comfort, and that you would continue to remember the family. Others. Buford, did y'all have anybody else? Okay. Okay, y'all just, cover the same thing. Let's bow. Father, we do thank you for the opportunity to meet together tonight and comfort that we have here at our facility. We are mindful, Father, of your church that meets the world over, and how many of them are in difficult situations and difficult settings, and we pray for them. We're profoundly aware, Father, of those of our number who are dealing with health issues. We pray for Charles and his continued recovery, and especially as he begins this series of physical therapy, that he'll be up and about as soon as is practicable. We pray, Father, that you be with Mark tomorrow, and that could be addressed without further incident. We're mindful of Sister Nell Kennedy and her surgery, that would be thorough and complete, and that she would be better as a result of that. We're mindful, Father, of Mary Ledbetter and this entire family, and pray that you'd continue to be with them, and that every need, everything is being addressed to keep her as comfortable as possible, and that they would sense your presence during this very, very difficult time. We're mindful, Father, of Hunter and the group from Woodson Chapel that will be traveling to lay the groundwork for a more extensive trip as they extend their work there in that part of the world. Bless them with safety, and that they would get there and accomplish what they needed to do and be back without incident. Father, we continue to be mindful of our nation and the men and women in our military, and those that purposely have placed themselves in difficult settings to protect our freedoms, and we ask your continued blessings on them. Go with us as we study, as we take the truths and the insights that are presented within the text, and give us, Father, the courage and the convictions to make those applications that you deem necessary. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, we're wanting to wrap up this particular parable on what has come to be known the parable of the talents. And we'll go back and reference some things that we talked about last week. I was able to cover two points last week, and if I can cover two tonight, then I'll have this one in the bag, as it were. But for the benefit of our guests, we're in a series on the parables that Jesus shares, and the emphasis that he places on those. And I'm reminded of in thinking about this particular parable with the three men, three servants. We assume they were men, but they may not have been. But three servants who were given the bulk of their master's estate. One was given 5, one was given 2, and the other was given 1, as far as talents, if you will. T.S. Eliot, the famous playwright, wrote a play entitled "Murder in the Cathedral." And at one point in the play, he has a chorus speaking a very, very interesting line, it's a line that demonstrated the emptiness of life. And the chorus says in unison, quote, "Throughout the years we have gone on living, and partly living." And when you think about that and then look at where we are in this very interesting parable, there are three servants. Two are living and one is partly living. One is expressive of how empty life is, and he will express that in just a few moments. The uselessness of life, if you will. And really, Jesus tells this story, if you recall, to basically illustrate a wasted opportunity. And here again, if we look at these parables, I think it's important to remind ourselves that when Jesus sets the stage for the 10 virgins, and he sets this one for the parable of the talents, he's not talking about the world. How do we know? Because he says the kingdom of God can be compared to, and then he'll tell. So he's talking about believers. And you had five that had oil and 5 that didn't have oil. And this is kind of part of throughout Matthew's gospel. That there are going to be genuine children of God, genuine believers, and there are going to be those who are disingenuine or ingenuine. And you go throughout Matthew's gospel. In fact, we may have an opportunity to reference some of these. But Matthew has already recorded Jesus' parable. In fact, we started out, we're talking about the good soil and the bad soil. The end of Matthew 7, there are houses that were built on a rock, and there were others that were built on sand. There are people who are going the broad way, and then there are those that are going the narrow way, through a broad gate and a narrow gate. And as I said, there are wheat and there are tares. And so now there are true servants and there are false servants. And this is consistent throughout Matthew's gospel. And he's basically saying, yes, there are genuine, sincere people who are following Jesus, but there are also others that are not as genuine. And he's basically saying you've got to be mindful of both. And if you follow on into even here in Matthew 28, he's going to at least talk about sorting the sheep from the goats at the time of the judgment, right? And all distinctions are made because, here again, back to verse 36 of chapter 24, because the day and the hour when the Lord comes knows no man, no, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Verse 42, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord comes. Verse 44, verse 50, and then chapter 25 and verse 13. And what sets all this up, if you go back to chapter 24, the disciples ask the question, what then, what shall these things be, or when will these? And he tells them 5 times what? Nobody knows. And just for kind of kicks and giggles, in a warped sort of way, I did a little checking since last Wednesday night, just looking at podcasts, and you realize that every time there is any kind of a hiccup in the Middle East, this starts up again. And I'll never forget, in 1991, when the first Gulf War had really been taken to another level, and I had a chance to go to a education conference in New Orleans. We were in Mobile at the time, and I remember driving that and past so many churches out on their marquee, get ready for Armageddon, and I'm thinking, this is not Armageddon. This is not Armageddon. And what really, stirs this is if Israel is involved. And of course, remember in the early Gulf War, we did everything we could to keep Israel out of it. And so if we kept them out of the first one, and for the most part the second one, now Well, you go back to October of 24 when the Palestinians, crossed the border. Oh, that was it. This is it. This is the startup of it. Well, it didn't happen. And it's not going to happen in that regard. So, based on what Jesus has said here, because, as we said, the first 12 verses here, the 25th chapter, and then this second one, emphasize the basic requirement is what? You watch. You be ready. You be prepared for the coming of the Lord, regardless of when it might be. So doing that, we looked at a couple of points last week, and I'll just review those very quickly, and then we'll get to the other two. First of all, we looked at the responsibility that we receive. And this is not a difficult, one of those difficult sections where you try to figure out, well, where do I fit into this? And without crossing the threshold into narcigesis, and that is where you see yourself in every part of the text, which I think is fallacious. You can't do that. Here, it's pretty straightforward. And again, we go back to verse 14. It's like a man traveling into a far country, and he calls his servants, and he delivered unto them his goods. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1. And the key to that is that last phrase, what? To every man according to his ability. Now, that's where I think we got into this arena that, what talents here talking about, ability. No, it's talking about money. And, one was given 5 because he had a higher probability of being able to turn a profit. And we're going to come back to that word in a minute. Same thing with the 2 talent one and the 1. And it's a very simple outline. It's a very simple story about a man with these servants. He goes away and he leaves them in charge of what he possesses, and then he'll come back. Now, in this way, you think, okay, well, how is that like the kingdom? And again, we're not talking about abilities, but what we're talking about are opportunities and privileges. And given that, I would go as far as to say that every one of us in here in the southeastern part of the United States, particularly those of us who are second and third generation believers, we would be 5 talent servants. Not based on ability, but based on opportunity and privilege. Others, you might be the first one in your family. You might be the only one in your family that's a believer. Well, you might be put in the category of the 2 or maybe the one talent. And it's not a knock. It doesn't mean you're less of a Christian. It doesn't mean you're, weak. You're a weaker. Doesn't mean that at all. And so really, when you look at it in that light, we see this all the time in the church. And every Sunday when we gather together, we've got people from such a wide background. And they're, here again, those of us that the church is all we've ever known. We were born and raised in it. There are others that are in the process of discovering it for the first time. They're seekers in the purest sense of the word in that regard. And so Jesus says you've got that, and the idea here is he's presenting kind of an outward, visible picture of what, those who belong to the church or those who are part of the church, this is what this looks like. So in the kingdom, to follow Jesus' description, there's a man and he gives responsibility to his servants according to their abilities. And we looked at this and said this last week in talking about the gospel. In other words, this is the privilege of being exposed to the truth of God, to the redemption of Jesus Christ. And there are those of us that have multiple opportunities with this because of where we were raised and how we were raised. And unless we get haughty or arrogant about that, with that comes what? Tremendous amount of responsibility. And so we're not to look down on the one talent individual. Their exposure might have been limited or minimal in that regard. I think about Hunter going down to Honduras and the work that we do in El Salvador and Cuba and Mexico, and all you encounter for the most part down there would be one talent believers, because they were exposed to it, in a more recent time, and it doesn't mean, here again, you don't question sincerity, but here again, it's all about privilege, and it's all about opportunity. So that, I think, has to do with the responsibility that we have. That takes us to the second point that we talked about, and that is the reaction. How do we react to what the owner, the landowner, or God, would be the representative, or he is represented this way? And verse 16, this is what's done with these spiritual opportunities. He that received the 5 talents immediately went and traded with the same and made other 5 talents. Now here's a person who makes a 100% return on the investment, right? And by the way, the word there, and we'll come back to this in a minute, it's a financial point that's being made. And he uses that to illustrate the kind of person that makes the most of their spiritual opportunities. And they believed that the gospel that they heard was to be shared with other people. And then you have in verse 17, he that received 2 gained 2 more. And that's what's interesting about this. Yeah, this guy only had 2, but he did the very same thing. He maybe he didn't have as many privileges or opportunities as the 5 talent guy, but he had the same result. He took the ones that he had and he fulfilled all that responsibility, and in that regard, the 2 are going to be viewed as the same. Now we come to verse 18. The one who received 1 talent went and dug in the earth and hid his Lord's money. Now, here's an indication of a problem. Here's an issue. He made nothing in terms of effort. He did nothing. He thought about nothing. He invested in nothing. And it's not because he only had 1 talent. That's very, very critical to remember. It's not because he only had 1. In fact, he'll kind of get to this in just a few moments. So, he has the 1, and it could very easily, the way Jesus told this, you could have had the 5 talent guy could have done the same thing. The 2 talent, they all had the same opportunity. They all, watch this, they all had the same choices. And I think that's critical in that regard. Which brings us to where basically where we got to last week, and that is the reckoning. We had the responsibility, we had the reaction, and the third thing we need to notice is the reckoning. Why? Because verse 19 says, after a long time, guess what happened? He came home. And I remember we said this last week, in some of these settings, he could have been gone upwards of a year, year and a half, maybe 2 years. When they took trips like that. It was a pretty involved thing. And so he was gone, and now he's back. And the implication is that he may have been delayed in coming back. What happened in the earlier one about the 10 virgins? What happened to the bridegroom? While the bridegroom, Old King James says, while the bridegroom tarried. Which meant what? Well, he got held up. He was delayed. Doesn't tell us why, but he didn't get there at the time that he was supposed to. Same thing here. They didn't know when he was going to return, but obviously it was delayed, just like verse 5 of chapter 25, because he said same thing happened with the bridegroom. And so kind of tells you a little bit about what Jesus' return is going to be like. And to reckon, excuse me, the word is a commercial term. It means to compare accounts. He's going to come back. In fact, what's a more modern, up-to-date word for that? Audit. He's gonna audit. Gonna look at the books and take a look at what's been done. And it's kind of a fascinating thing, the way accounting, and this is kind of timely because it's the 15th of April, but some of you don't look surprised. Yeah, today's the day. But you've got companies, corporations, businesses. We ran into a guy last week, and he works for an accounting firm in Birmingham, but he was here because he and a couple of his other associates were auditing the Guntersville school system. They have to get an independent audit. It can't be somebody in town. So this firm was from Birmingham, and that's what they're doing. And I asked him, and he said, well, we're looking for consistency and for discrepancies. And so that's the thing. And so when he comes, when Jesus comes, there will be this reckoning. And the wheat and tares are going to be separated, and the good soil and the bad soil are going to be separated. And the houses that have a foundation are going to be, put in one place, and those without foundation will be put somewhere else. And it's the idea of judgment is the Lord's discernment. And so verse 19, the man comes back to reckon his accounts. Verse 20 tells us what happened. He who had received 5 talents came, and he brought 5 talents more, saying, and I want you to hear the order in the original language. Lord, 5 talents you delivered to me. Behold, 5 talents more I have gained. That's a literal, almost word for word from the original language. 5 talents you delivered to me. Behold, 5 talents more I have gained. So what's the emphasis on? The 5 talents, right? Pretty obvious. And he's excited. He's not afraid of judgment or an audit. That doesn't scare him in the least. I have never, I'm knocking on wood, I've never been audited by the IRS yet. But I would think that if that ever happened, I wouldn't really be afraid necessarily. My parents, they're not watching that, I'm not worried, they don't watch me. But my parents have been audited twice. And both times, this was before, it was after the second time that Mother said, we're going to get an accountant, we're going to hire, because she did it. And the 2 times, it was almost back-to-back years that they were audited, and both times, Daddy put her out at the federal building in Montgomery and said, you go ahead, I'll go park the car, and he never went back. And made her go in there, and of course, it was nothing egregious, because ministers are considered self-employed, and it's just, our taxes are done a little bit differently than other people. They really were then because everything was itemized, and we don't do that now. But yeah, two audits, and after the second time, Mother went, nah, nope, I ain't doing it. She said, if we get audited again, you're going. Well, he couldn't explain anything to him because he didn't do it. Mother filled everything out, and so I guess he figured if anybody's got to go to jail, it needs to be her. The only thing I can figure out. But anyway, this 5-talent guy is not worried. He's rendered the adequate amount of service that was expected of him. And Paul, put it this way, it talks about boldness in the day of judgment. He'll have boldness in the day. John would say he'll not be ashamed at the coming of the Lord. Why? Because he has something to show for all the opportunities and all the privileges that he was given. And so that's the emphasis here. Master, 5 talents you delivered me, tells us that he knew what? The source of everything was whom? It wasn't him, it was the Lord. 5 talents you delivered me. There's no ego, there's no boasting, there's no pride, there's no self-styled spirituality going on here. He's saying, you gave me 5 talents. I recognize the source of that privilege. I recognize the source of those opportunities. And 5 talents you gave me, but 5 more talents have I gained. Great. I mean, that's even in the response of the master, right? In fact, it's similar to what Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4, verse 7. I'm now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I've fought a good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. Here's the term, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day. So Paul said, it's not about me. Paul says, I'm ready to go. I know I'm going to receive a reward when I get there. And that's not ego, as some sometimes erroneously interpret that. That's a sense of fulfillment. And the master acknowledges this. Look at verse 21. He knows he's not boasting. He said to him, and the original language begins with 2 Greek letters, an E and a U. The 2 words together are translated good. We would say excellent, inherently good, genuinely good. That word is short, but it has a very extensive definition. You did well. You could be trusted with this. You're good. You're trustworthy. And here again, he's not just talking about the fact that he doubled the investment. It's what? It's a characterization. He's not just commenting on the man's service. He didn't say, you are a shrewd businessman. You are a really keen investor. He doesn't say that. He said, in fact, literally, excellent, you good and faithful servant. You made the most of the privilege and the most of the opportunities. In fact, he goes on to say what? You were been faithful with a little, and now you'll be faithful. I'll put you in charge of more. What is that? That's more opportunity. That's more privilege. That's more service. And there's a reason for that. And if I'll hurry up, we'll come back to that. And so he does the same thing to the 2-talent one, right? Same, almost verbatim, almost the exact same thing. And it's an interesting breakdown because he comes to him, verse 22, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. Same identical wording. Well done, good and faithful. Excellent, is one translation. You've been faithful over a little. I'll set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And I wish we had time tonight to try to define what does that mean. Enter into the joy of your Lord. I mean, it would have been enough for him to just said, you're good and you're a trustworthy servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many. But then he adds that phrase, enter into the joy of your Lord. And that's not talking about our joy. It's possessive. It's his joy. And so what's the principle with both of these? The reward for a believer is not going to be floating around on a cloud playing a harp. The picture is what? You serve here, and guess what? when we make it to heaven, what are we going to do there? We're going to keep serving. There's going to be even more opportunity. There's going to be even more of this going on. It's not going to be some type of sit back and relax kind of scenario in that regard. And if service to the Lord here is the greatest joy of life, then what is heaven going to be like? And that's here again I've told caution parents especially, don't tell your children that heaven is going to be one big worship service, because that's part of it, right? We are going to be around the throne, but I think indication is here that you'll get there because of your faithfulness and because of your service, but it's not going to end here. That faithfulness and that service is going to be taken to another level in that regard. And so now your level of service is going to be determined by the opportunities and the privilege that you have now. But then when you get on the other side, it won't, everything's equal in that regard. And that's a marvelous part of this. Well, this is another one of those incidences that you wish it had just ended here. Wish it had just stopped here, but it doesn't. Because he talks to the one with 5 talents. He talks to the one with 2, and then he's got to go with the third one. Now notice this, if you go back and look at the text, the man with 5 received 3 commendations. There was a verbal one, and then he says, good and faithful servant, and then he's made responsible for even greater things. And what's the third commendation? He enters into the joy of his Lord. Same thing with the second, the 2-talent man. And verse 24, then he who had received the 1 talent came. Now watch this. And we kind of hem-hawed around this last week. But look at verse 24. He who received the 1 came and he said, Lord, I knew you, that you're a hard man, reaping where you had not sown and gathering where you had not spread. And I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the earth, and here is what's yours. Now, this is completely different, right? We go from the glad, joyful part of the story, and this part is just very, very sad. Because, keep in mind, all 3 servants are the same. One professes to believe. He says he's a servant. He belongs to the same household as the other 2. He's in the estate, if you will, right? He's a part of it. And but there are 2 things that kind of betray him, and we hinted at this last week. Number 1, he produced absolutely nothing. He produced nothing. There was no fruit. There was no indication that he had ever been given that 1 talent, or that he had been given this opportunity or this privilege. There's no indication of that. Secondly, it was the fact that he attacked his master. He attacks the character of his master because he says what? I knew you were a hard man. And in doing this, he basically reveals, and I think this is crucial, he basically reveals that he doesn't really know his master. I know you, and this is his opinion, that you're a hard man. Now, this guy is not anti-God. He's not an atheist. He's not antichrist. He says he's a servant. He says he belongs. But he's basically, well, we'll get to that in a minute. He's illustrating someone who just Wasted an opportunity. He lived in the same environment as the other two. He said he served the Lord, but he didn't. And first we know it because, as I said, there was no fruit, there was no indication. And then he hid it in the ground. And then he says, look what he says. I knew you were a hard man. It's the word there is scleros. It's from where we get our word sclerosis, which is what? Hardening of the arteries. Yeah. I knew you were scleros. You're hard, you're unforgiving, you're unrelenting, you're ungracious, you lack compassion, you're too tough, you have no sensitivity. Not smart. That's just not smart. And then but again, he keeps going. And then he says, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't spread. You know what that means? You're stealing other people's crop. When you reap what you didn't sow, you're harvesting somebody else's work. And when you gather where you haven't scattered, you're picking up somebody else's grain. And he says, I know two things. One, you're hard and ungracious. And secondly, you take things from other people. Now, the question is, why would he do that? I mean, what's his rationale here? And here again, to follow the analogy, Jesus is talking about people within our movement, people within our churches who claim to be believers, but they prove they don't really have a clue who God is. Because God is everything just the opposite of what this guy's saying. God doesn't do that. God is not unrelenting. God is not unkind. God is not unconscious. But He's blind to all of His Master's grace and His Master's understanding and His kindness and mercy. And the question is, why? This man attacks his Master, calls him ungracious and unworthy of collecting the harvest from somebody else's work. And you ask the question, why? The answer comes up in verse 25. That 3 words, I was afraid. Of what was he afraid? Well, he was afraid of such an unbending, ungracious God. Or maybe he meant, I was afraid to try and invest it and lose it. I knew if I lost it, I'd get punished, and if I gained something and gained it, then you'd take it anyway. So it was, I couldn't win. If I lost, I lost. If I gained, I lost. So I was afraid of you. And I went back and I hid it and figured the best thing to do was to make sure I could deliver it back to you. Here, in fact, the original language says, here you have what is yours. Fair enough. We're all clear. But that's an excuse. This is just nothing. Just nothingness here. Here, you have what's yours. And verse 26, his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant. Now notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, poor misguided fellow. You've got a really fouled up theology. No, that's not what he says. That man was a part of the community of servants. Same opportunities, same privileges, And so all of these excuses that he offers up were just that. They were just excuses. And I kind of got us to thinking about this last week. When you think about where we are in comparison to other parts of the world, and I think those of you that participated, Sunday afternoon, and we found out that the representative from Healing Hands was here, and he said a lot of these wells that are being dug right now are being dug on church property. so that when people walk to come get clean water, they come to the church building, and there's an avenue there. They get all the water they need, and then there's an opportunity for outreach, which is great. And those of us that some walked, there were those of us who strolled, but you got an idea. And Adam and Carla swapped back that they had those watering cans at different levels of water, so you would get an idea of what it was like to carry, 4.5 gallons of water for 4 miles, and that's just just one day, and so there was just a tangible reminder of the privilege and the opportunities that we have here, and yet you think of some of the lame excuses that we come up with for not reaching out and taking the Great Commission to our community and to our own arenas in our part of the world, and they're every bit as lame as this guy's. Good, we're almost out of time, so I can say this and explain it later. We have found ways through the course of our movement to fight and divide over some of the dumbest things and claim they were part of orthodoxy or doctrine, and they were nothing but that. And I personally know of congregations that took time, energy, and resources and argued and divided, you're not ready for this, argued and divided over translations, over what translation of the Bible should be used. And if you used a particular translation that I deemed less than somehow that puts you in a different category, and we could not share, again, this guy acted on ignorance, and I think that whole thing was acted on ignorance too, because Paul and his associates took the absolute worst translation, the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Old Testament, we have yet to come up with an English translation that is as problematic as the Septuagint. When you compare the Greek text to the Hebrew text, hands down a terrible translation, but yet they converted the known world. So we've got to come up with something else. Translations, that's not gonna wash. That's not gonna be an excuse for not taking the message of the gospel to a dying world. All right? So what else we got? Can't be information, can't be transportation. We got all that. Let's see. Kind of running out, aren't we? And I don't know what you came up with. I've got some others that probably don't need to delve into now. But they all come back to what? Wasted opportunities. Wasted opportunities. And understand, I'm not knocking the fact that we are in the Bible Belt in the southeastern part of the United States, and we have a great location, great facility, unbelievable church. I'm not criticizing that in the least. I'm just saying that with that makes us 5-talent people for the most part. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? Because when you read further, oh, by the way, I don't want to end without talking about what the Lord says to him. And he says, if you knew that, in other words, even if that had been true, which it wasn't, but if you knew that, verse 27, you should have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received my own with interest. In other words, if your problem was really what you thought, that I was a hard man, and you thought I wanted to take and harvest something that somebody else had worked for, if you knew that's what I wanted, then why didn't you at least give it to the exchangers and give me a little bit of interest? He's saying what? You are a liar. That's not why he buried it. If that was true, if you believed all that, just at least take it to the bank. And by the way, interesting thing I found out about that then, in the Roman Empire, the maximum loan rate was 12%. A bank, you could give the bank your money to invest and they would give you 6%, but then they would turn around and invest your money at 12%, but 12 was the maximum. They couldn't charge in more than 12%, which is rather interesting, in that regard. And so the owner is saying at least I would have gotten 6%. I would have received mine with, and the Greek word there is with interest. And so we look at the reckoning and then finally the reward. What happens? Verse 28. Take then the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. And before you jump there, why him? Why give it to the guy that had 10? Why didn't he give it to the guy that only had 4? Well, to be consistent in what he's saying, the guy with 10 was the most able to carry it. He had the greater capacity. See, and it falls into this principle that God expects more of those of us who have more. And there's an interesting cycle here, that the more you serve and the greater your level of responsibility, guess what? The longer you're around, the more of that you're going to get. That's going to increase. And you're more opportunities to serve, more capacity for responsibility. And here again, we really don't know. We really don't know. Why did he give it to the guy with 10 instead of, I don't know. That might be something you can put on your list to ask when the time comes. But I would say initially, probably because the master knew this guy had a greater capacity of it. So let me summarize it in 30 seconds, and then I'm done. In the kingdom, in the church, there are going to be those who are prepared and serve the Lord and are coming to that point of greater responsibility. And then there are going to be those who are unprepared, who outwardly may be active, but they're not ready. And when the Lord comes, there'll be a separation. There'll be a delineation, if you will, based upon what? Service. Go back, you get to the end, fast forward to the end of the 25th chapter, and we're given that picture of the judgment. And Jesus says, you want to know why you're here? Because I was this, I was naked, I was hungry, and you did all these things. And to those on the left, he said, I was these things and you did nothing. It's the same thing as the 1 talent guy. It wasn't you did the wrong thing, it was what? You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. And when the Lord comes, as I said, there's going to be that separation. All excuses will be set aside. False service is going to end. And that which they appear to be doing is going to be given to somebody else throughout eternity, by the way. And so this is why this ends this way. And Jesus gives us a little bit of insight into that. Cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. There men will weep and gnash their teeth. And he jumps in the parable. He jumps from a typical setting of this is my money, invest it, to really eternity in that regard. And so here again, there really is no break here. When you read, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and gives all that, then he gives the criteria. And I contend that when he gets to this about Jesus being hungry and thirsty and a stranger and naked and sick and in prison, and then it goes to it's basically a further explanation of this parable. It's a further explanation because those who did feed and clothe and they're what? Those are the privileges and the opportunities. And the guy, the guy wasn't afraid. I think he's lying. He was not afraid. He just didn't do anything. And I think it's a great reminder. Okay, we'll pick up here with a new parable next week. And who knows how long we'll take with it. But thank you for being here.